Let me reveal something most men never notice. Not because it's hidden, but because it's quiet. Too still for the noisy world to hear. Too deep for the restless to feel. Welcome to Stoic Courage, where we don't chase what's easy to lose. We become what cannot be replaced. In a world saturated with noise, notifications, and dopamine, there is a rare kind of power. The power of doing absolutely nothing. No chasing, no reacting, no desperate need to fill the silence. You'll hear all kinds of advice. Text this, wear that, say it just right. But almost no one speaks of the Stoic mindset. Stop trying to perform and start becoming. Not a tactic, not a persona, just solid. She may never put it into words, but what unsettles her comes from the part of you that never tried to impress her. From the space with no form, no sound, yet somehow echoes in her mind like a silence that never ended. You don't have to believe me right away. Just listen. If some part of you feels this isn't empty talk, because what 99% of men never dare to do has nothing to do with what's visible, and everything to do with mastering the quiet no one ever taught them to hold. Tension is not a signal to run. It's a doorway few dare to stand in. Most men break it, with humor, with apologies, with words that mean nothing. But the rare man holds it, not to manipulate, but to anchor. He doesn't flinch when silence stretches. He doesn't chase clarity when things get vague. He simply remains, still, unmoved, uncomfortable, but unshaken. And strangely, this shapes the room, shapes her energy, shapes the moment. This is Stoic presence, not loud, but magnetic, not controlling, but unforgettable. She asks what you feel, you answer with words, but her eyes say, "You've already said too much," because a man who over-explains is often trying to convince not her, but himself. Women don't need your breakdown. They sense your center, or they sense its absence. The Stoics didn't beg to be understood. They embodied clarity without explanation. Their stillness was their proof. You can't talk your way into her soul, but she'll feel the man who doesn't need her to understand him to remain whole. So don't explain, don't prove, be undeniable. The ones you remember most aren't always the loudest. Often it's the one who said nothing when everyone else tried to impress. Because power doesn't always arrive. Sometimes it withdraws. Deliberately, unapologetically. Most chase presence, trying to be seen, heard, validated. But the rare man does something far more dangerous. He lets go of his need to be noticed, and suddenly he becomes the one she can't stop noticing. Not because he stands out, but because he doesn't try. Not because he speaks well, but because silence wraps around him like armor. He doesn't posture. He doesn't brand himself as alpha. He doesn't need an audience, because his internal sovereignty is not for sale. She's intrigued not by his approach, but by his absence from the game. He offers no bait, no hook, no invitation, and that creates a tension no performance could manufacture. It's what Stoics live by. Presence beyond posture, quiet dominance, the power that never demands, but still defines the room. The truth is, the edge she feels isn't what he shows. It's what he withholds without fear of losing her attention. He doesn't block her, doesn't unfollow, doesn't make speeches or exits or grand statements. He just stops arriving, no longer brings his attention like an offering, no longer enters the space she once left open. No anger, no bitterness, just a sovereign distance she can't quite name, but feels. Because some men don't walk away. They dissolve from the places they were never truly welcomed, not to punish, but to preserve. This is silent refusal. No drama, no announcement. Just a presence that no longer steps forward. And ironically, that absence hits harder than 1,000 emotional outbursts because it's clean, it's quiet, it's unarguable. She looks for the echo of the old chase, but it's not there because he's no longer in motion, only in essence. That's presence without pursuit. He still exists in the room, but not in the pull, not in the reach, not in the need. And somehow, that hurts more because there's no blame, no conversation to have, just an undeniable boundary drawn without hands. This is how a Stoic man leaves, not by vanishing, but by returning fully to himself. She wanted him close, but only when it was convenient, only when it didn't threaten her control. So he gave, not out of desperation, but out of clarity, to see what would echo back. What echoed was silence. And from that silence, he built something rare, emotional sovereignty, not coldness, not revenge, but freedom from the loop, from the question, am I enough for her? Because the real question was, is she enough for the man I'm becoming? The unchaste man terrifies, not because he's distant, but because his distance is no longer emotional. It's structural, permanent, quiet self-ownership that cannot be negotiated. Now she reaches, but it's too late, because some doors don't slam, they just stop opening, and the man who once stayed too long has disappeared in the most devastating way. Not in anger, but in peace, and that peace is what finally made her realize he was never hers to break. Because you can't hold the man who's finally learned to hold himself. They said she left because he didn't say enough, didn't chase, didn't open up. But maybe she left because he stopped kneeling in a game that was never equal, because he no longer mistook proximity for connection or response for respect. Maybe she didn't lose interest. She lost influence. And in that loss, she met the version of him that was never meant to beg. This is the silence they fear, not the silence of rejection, but the silence of a man who finally remembers who he is.